All right, super. Welcome everyone to day 6 of the Petaluma Fairgrounds Advisory Panel. We're on a Saturday. It's just going to be a morning today from 9 to noon, and then we're going to have another morning, which is sort of the second half of this day, so to speak, tomorrow from 9 to noon. Yeah, so happy to be at this again. We're going to have a few presenters today. We're going to have a bunch of time in small groups. Thank goodness, because yesterday was very information heavy, and you all didn't have as much time in small groups. So this time we'll have plenty of time in small groups. Yeah, Alex, maybe I can turn it over to you for a first few notes, and then I'll come back again.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being back with us in the Zoom room. So we're going to start out today like we do many days and kind of orient you to where we are in the process. So you've seen this process diagram several times now, but I'm going to share my screen with it again. And let's see here. All right. So even despite the change of format, this overall process is pretty much the same. We are here on June 18th, and you'll see we're right in this place where we're ending the information gathering phase. We have a couple more presenters for you this morning. We have a different kind of information, different kind of informational input for you tomorrow morning as well. But we're kind of wrapping up that stage of the process. Not that you can't still continue to ask questions and call people back if you need additional feedback. But we're kind of moving more now into starting to work on your reports. So today you'll have a lot of time to start getting into deliberation with each other about the principles and values that should guide your decision making about your recommendation to the city and fair board. And after that, we'll be moving into a report on options and bundles of options for the fairgrounds property. So today we'll be doing a little bit on both of those, but then really we'll come back and this principles and values chevron should just get extended now out to July 2nd, now that we've lost a little bit of time this weekend. You'll be producing that report by early July sometime. So that's where we are in the process. And I want to acknowledge, we usually
Alex, can you slow down for interpretation, please?
Thank you, yes. Thank you. All right. We try to always acknowledge things that we heard yesterday and, to say how we're addressing them. One piece of feedback we got through moderators from small groups was that a couple people were confused. Some folks you had voted quite high on your list of presenters after our last session. You haven't heard from this weekend, and we absolutely want to acknowledge why. I'll pause. So just we did our absolute best. We reached out to all of the folks who were highest on your prioritization when you did your sticky dot voting on June 4th. And there were a few folks who we just couldn't get here. So for scheduling reasons, that includes the student representatives from the junior college and the Bilingual Student Association from high school. And we acknowledge, that there are still some gaps. So just want to assure everybody that we're in touch with those folks, and we'll keep trying to see if they can come present to you in a different format. And also, we will talk about this more tomorrow, but tomorrow we'll be sharing the results of an equity survey that we've collected from community, and specifically folks who have been underrepresented in Petaluma's public discourse and decision making. So hoping that there are youth voices in that survey, some other groups that folks were feeling like hadn't heard from as much. We're hoping that that's another vehicle to get those perspectives to you. So more on that tomorrow. But thanks for those questions. And I do want to acknowledge that we tried our best. There are always some scheduling pieces that prevent getting you every single person on your list as we'd like to. Let's see, Lynn, do you want to talk about interpretation changes?
Sounds good. And I think we got a number of really useful pieces of feedback from moderators and from you all via a summary from the researchers. We never see your end of day surveys, but they tell us sort of some general themes that they're hearing. And we know that particularly during the beginning of the day yesterday, interpretation was hard because folks were talking quickly, and it was hard to see, we don't have a paper in the room in the same way that we did. So I think we're changing a couple of things for today. We're telling presenters that we're going to be much more aggressive about sort of pausing them. It doesn't reduce their time. We stop the timer. And asking them to slow down when they're asking questions or answering questions, and also asking them how we can help them better do that, because it's a learning curve for everyone. Really appreciate all of you, all of your patience in that. Another thing that we saw in some of the summary of some of those surveys was that folks had different experiences, it seemed like, in small groups, where some moderators were being more or less sort of involved in helping to share airtime between folks who were speaking more or less. So a note to moderators to help share airtime still. But also I wanted to note to all of you that you're very welcome to play that role as well. If you sort of see an imbalance in your small group that, hey, these folks, a couple of folks haven't really contributed very much here, feel free to reach out to them and say, hey, is there anything, I haven't heard from so-and-so in a little while. I'd love to hear what they had to say about this. That's awesome. You can absolutely do that. Feel free to play the role, and help to bring all the voices into the group if you're noticing that in your small groups. And I think, I'll do the one more note here about sort of our change of plans today. A little bit, we mentioned in the email that we were going to ask folks to come by the community center today in the afternoon. And we realized that may not be absolutely necessary. Coming by today is still an option. Coming by tomorrow is actually also an option. We'll talk more about that, but it's not necessarily absolutely necessary. However, if you haven't received your tickets to the fair that the fair offered all of you, and if you haven't picked those up already, you're very welcome to come down, and you'll need to get those in paper form. So do come down and grab those. But we'll talk more about the end of the day, and you can decide whether you want to come down or just contribute something we can do it digitally possibly as well if you're comfortable with that. And I think our last thing here is to invite Peyton to properly introduce himself, because it was very rushed at the end of the day there, and I was worried about keeping people too long and getting to the survey. So Peyton, please introduce yourself to the group.
Don't worry, I'm not that interesting. That was just the right No, thank you so much. My name is Peyton Silkett. I'm a community organizer here in the Bay Area. I work mostly in Oakland and Richmond. Graduated from Pepperdine University with my master's in mediation and dispute resolution. And so I absolutely believe in this process of what it is that we're doing here, bringing people together with genuine concerns and real passion on solving issues, and getting the voices out there and reaching agreement and resolution through these processes. So I'm here at your service, and just look forward to assisting you all as you guys make the decisions that are best for your community. and for yourselves. So thank you so much.
Thanks for being here, Peyton. Appreciate it. You'll see a couple different moderators maybe today and tomorrow just scheduling things, but I think you've met everybody else now, and so happy to have an incredibly talented moderating team. All right. Alex, do you want to move us to the next thing here? Or any questions from anybody about anything?
Well, I know okay, perfect. Yeah, so now we're going to move for about a brief little period here, just a little teaser for what's coming later in the day. We do have presenters coming at 9:30, but we wanted to kind of bring people back to what we started discussing on June 4th about principles and options. You'll remember Lynn and I did that presentation, giving a couple examples of getting a dog, finding a new home to live in, and demonstrated a little bit about how all of us, all the time, use values or criteria to guide the decisions we make in our lives. And we handed out a worksheet that we were going to do right after that presentation, didn't have time. We want to come back to that now. So I'll give a moment, everybody try to pull up, find in your binders, hopefully it's in your worksheets tab, and I will share it on screen so you can see what it looks like. It's called Principles and Options Worksheet. Like this. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes here to take a moment and think of an example of a decision you've made recently, maybe something akin to moving or getting a pet. Not a terribly complex decision. Well, actually, what am I saying? Those are both quite complex. And then fill out this worksheet. So what mattered most to you? What guided your decision making? That might be values, might be criteria, might be kind of the checklist that you ticked off as you considered options later on. And then what were all the options available to you? So not even just what you considered or what you thought you might do, but everything on the table, everything you might have done in that situation. So, and this is really simple. It's just those 2 questions. So if you, for whatever reason, can't find that worksheet, feel free to just look at the screen and answer these 2 questions on a piece of scratch paper. And we'll take about 4 minutes just to do a little thinking and come back and have a bit of discussion about how that was.
All right, super. So just a real short kind of little practice thing just to get brains working here in the morning. So we won't spend a ton of time on this, but would love to hear from a few folks about what your decision was and what a couple of the principles were, a couple of the options were. Anybody have one they'd like to share? And remember to raise your hand, or you can raise your hand in, I see Izzy raising her hand. Go ahead, Izzy. Oh, maybe able to unmute. Let me see if I can help with that.
All right.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I made the decision to go back to the gym and work out. Because for the past 2 years during the pandemic, I gained 20 pounds.
Me too.
Yeah, so I had to lose the weight and stay in shape. And as I'm an old guy now, you know, I just need to take care of my health and, you know, eat better. So that was the decision which I made about. It's been a month now since I returned back to the gym.
Awesome. So it sounds like there's sort of a principle there about, you know, taking care of yourself, and, you know, maybe particularly because you're getting older, and that causing then you to choose that to make a decision there. That's awesome. I see Eric G in the lineup here. Go for it.
Yeah, thank you. So I recently retired, so I needed help getting someone to manage finances, which is, you can't get a whole lot more serious than that. So my principles were, trust was the highest principle. I needed somebody I could really trust. They had to be competent. They needed to be compatible with other people and concerns that go along with your, you know, what makes up your life. They had to be available, you know, easily contacted. They had to be, you know, driving distance, you know, within an hour or so. And then of course, cost. This could be medical, it could be any big decision like this. I think as I was looking at the principles, they applied to a lot of things. And then my options were, I could DIY, which is flies in the face of competency. I don't know what I'm doing. I could get somebody like public to do it, that, you know, like a large company that has a presence. I could get someone private. And then as far as the cost, some people charge by the hour, some people charge a percentage. So as I say, this could apply to, you know, buying a car, finding medical help. In my case, it was just financial stuff. But when you start looking at it, I think trust and competency, and then how much you're willing to do yourself and whether you think you can do a good job. So.
It's awesome. Appreciate you pointing out sort of that principles might apply to multiple different kinds of areas, and that you know, where the options might line up. Cool. Let's go one more here, and just head down the list here. Jared.
All right. Joining this panel, I think, was a big decision that I was really excited about, and I know it was a lottery, so that's, you know, part of that. But I really wanted to be here because the principles were protecting the fairground, Some of the decisions that led to that for me was tired of the urban sprawl, tired of the city building on every piece of land that they can, watching houses go up in areas that used to just be open space. We're kind of losing touch with our little town, our small town feel by building houses everywhere, and I was tired of seeing it. And I just wanted to protect the fairgrounds to help it be there for grandkids and great grandkids. So some of the options that I had were voting, which I did. It helped a bit, I think. Going to city planning meetings and writing letters to letters or emails to city council members, and speaking with friends and neighbors and anybody who will listen about trying to keep our unique town unique by keeping the things that make it unique.
Right. Awesome. Thanks. That's a great example. Extremely relevant to how you got here. Appreciate that. I think that's where we'll end here because we're right at time. Sorry, Lena and Patty. And let me turn it over to Alex to head right into our first presenters of the day, or only presenters.
Yeah. Thanks, Lynn. And this is just a teaser. As I said, we'll jump back into principles for most of this morning. So, but we're excited to have our final group of presenters for the weekend. We're joined right now by Brian Sobel and Allison Keaney, as you both know, because you invited them here. Brian is formerly with the Petaluma City Council and formerly with the Sonoma Marin Fair Board. Allison Keaney was also the past CEO of the Sonoma Marin Fairgrounds and is currently with the Cloverdale Citrus Fair. And we're happy to have them here. You all know the format for these very well. To our presenters, again, you'll have 10 minutes each. Lynn will be holding up a little timer in his screen so you can watch your time click down. Whenever we ask you to pause, which we will, I will be stepping in and asking you to pause for our interpretation team. Then we will stop the timer and you'll get your full 10 minutes. And then we'll open it up for a combined Q&A afterwards. So let's first have Allison Keaney. Welcome, and I will begin sharing your slides now. The floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you so much. And thank you to the panel for inviting me. We will get started. I hope to add some clarity and good information for you, and want to breeze through this so that we can spend more time on questions. Again, I'm Dr. Allison Keaney. I am formerly the CEO of the Sonoma Marin Fairgrounds. I ran 2 fairs, one virtual fair, one hybrid fair, took care of 12 tenants, participated in 5 evacuation events and COVID testing and a number of other ideas. Let's see. I am, like as Alex said, I'm currently in Cloverdale. I'm also transitioning to running the Cow Palace in San Francisco. All right, so let's go ahead to the next slide, please.
Okay.
I'm not used to having someone chauffeur me. This is great. So the question presented to us is certainly, how the city would use the fairgrounds property. And before I answer the question about how, I wanted to go back and talk to the what. And the what definitely is going to drive the how. And, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, form should follow function. So let's talk about the what a little bit first. Next slide.
I'm just going to add a little pause for the interpreters between slides here,
Certainly.
Allison.
I need to slow down. I will slow down. Can you tell me when?
Oh yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay. So I was very fortunate to be able to attend the public session 2 weeks ago. I thought it was incredibly valuable, and I wanted to tether together some information and feedback from the survey that I conducted in June and July of last year, which I know you've all received. If you haven't or haven't had a chance to look at it, you can access it on the Sonoma Marin Fair website. But I wanted to bring some top line things here, because while the public input session 2 weeks ago gathered an incredibly wonderful, rich list of what the public wanted to see the fairgrounds used for, all ideas were pretty much treated with the same weight. And again, remember, so I'm a PhD and research is kind of my thing, a little bit differently than maybe market research is or focus groups or that type of research. And so weight and frequency is important when we talk about what kind of feedback we're getting. So I wanted to share a couple of things with you. So one was, what is the public's perception of the most important use? And other than the fair, using the fairgrounds as an event space and keeping it preserved for emergency services was very,
Little
very
pause. Oh, sorry, Allison.
okay.
Okay, you're probably good.
Okay. And then we wanted to know right now, what do people use the fairgrounds for? Because you don't want to come up with a new use and then throw out something that's very important in the process. So as you can see, 88% of the respondents come to the fair, but then the other high level uses are patronizing a business that's on the fairgrounds, attending concerts and festivals that are open to the public, and then attending private events. Then we asked what else would you like to see? What is not being offered enough now? And so you can see these 4 items: concerts and festivals, agriculture events, and that is outside of the fair, not just fair time, but being able to have that experience all year round. Community gatherings that are cultural based, arts based, theater, live music, cultural festivals, and then outdoor markets was another big one. So now this doesn't mean that people didn't say that they were interested in City Hall being on the fairgrounds. Doesn't mean that they didn't say that it would be nice to have police and fire on the fairgrounds. But those items were very, very far down the list of frequency of responses. That makes sense. So these were the top 4. Okay. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay. Just inserting a small pause. Okay.
Okay, so if that is the what, then let's talk a little bit about the how. So what I have learned in just taking care of this property for the approximate 4 years that I did is every piece of the property, every building, every alleyway, every lawn area has multiple uses. There are long-term uses, there are fair uses, there are emergency uses, and there are interim uses. So however the property is redesigned, it needs to retain its flexibility.
Okay.
Let's go ahead. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then part of that flexibility has to do with who is going to make these calls. So does the fair board make the call? Does the city make the call? And really the answer to that is both. When we get a very knowledgeable, talented group of people in a room, very similar to this panel, quite frankly, or the public who joined together 2 weeks ago, you get some really incredible ideas. And that hasn't happened yet. And that is absolutely essential to filling the best needs for the community. And we have other examples in the network of fairs where fairs have done this with their communities. We do not have to invent the wheel here. We can look to other properties who've done that as well. Okay. Okay, so some of the big myths, and I'm not bringing these up in order to dispel them, but part of the design process means that we need to understand the solutions as we need to understand and create solutions that are taking these things into account. So the Fair Board, being a bad steward of the property, has a lot to do with waiting to see what property is going to be allowed to remain under the oversight and purview of the Fair Board. It is misuse of public funds, which are what runs the fair, to invest in something that is not going to be something the public needs. The second thing that we hear a lot is the harm to the city by charging the fair $1 a year for rent. This is actually this practice actually occurs across the fair system. There are 4 other fairgrounds that pay their municipalities a very low cost of rent, from $1 to $1,280 a year. The benefit to the city is that when, at least when I was there, and the water main in the livestock area breaks, we don't call the landlord to come and fix it. We call the engineering company and we pay them thousands of dollars to fix that. When power pole falls in the parking lot, we don't call the city to come out and replace that for us. We go ahead and call the electrician and we order the pole and we have it installed, and $20,000 to $25,000 later, we've repaired that. So the fair has taken care of all of those things, whether it's somebody crashing into a fence off the street, water, power, and that is to the tune of $500,000 to $750,000 a year. So, and then the third one is that the property is underutilized. I really enjoyed hearing people discuss this underutilization 2 weeks ago, and where it came to was that the word underutilized is probably not quite correct, but it's underutilized for people's wishes. So they see things are happening. They know it's busy every weekend, but it's not something for them. And so I have said this word many, many times. This word emerged out of the survey, and that is evolve. And the fairgrounds, yes, does need to evolve and is happy to evolve, would love to evolve. And so underutilization really can be different utilization. And how we do this is together. I just want to reemphasize that.
Cool.
I think I'm finished.
All right. Thank you, Allison. And before we open it up for questions, let's have Brian Sobel. And Brian, just so panelists know, you don't have slides from Brian, but a little outline of his presentation that you can follow along with. So Brian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for the hard work in behalf of all the panelists. Thank you, Lynn, for the clock. And it's a pleasure to speak with you this morning. Alex referred to the fact that I spent a lot of years in public service in Petaluma. I actually served on the city council for 9 years. I served on the fair board for 9 years. And so it's been pointed out to me that I might be the only person in the history of the city of Petaluma to have served on both boards. So I bring to you a unique perspective, and that's the perspective of somebody who has dealt with the fairgrounds as an elected official representing the constituents of Petaluma, and as a 2-time governor's appointee to the fair district. I'm getting some reverb here.
Sorry, yeah, let's just pause and clear that up.
I think he's now muted, but
okay.
A good idea to take a little pause anyway, Brian.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
The point of all of this is that in being involved for this many years, probably 30 years with the fairgrounds property, I've heard the myths that Allison has discussed, but more importantly, I think for us today, is that I was privy to a number of discussions, legal discussions about what could occur at the fairgrounds. And in the years that I served on the city side of things, 2 different city attorneys made it very clear to the city council that the city was legally constrained as to what it could do with the fairgrounds based on the original acquisition of the property using a park bond. And you've been briefed on this. That opinion has been shared at least 2 or 3 times in my time by state's attorneys. So the idea that anything goes here is not supported by some very, very bright legal minds who have looked at this property. Why is that important? It's important because you hear people speculating about all the different uses that could occur at the property. But at the end of the day, without going to the public and asking the public what they think the future use ought to be of the fairgrounds, there is every chance that a legal challenge would be successful to try and provide other uses for that property. For example, housing and some other things. And I was moved by when I got on earlier and heard what Jared said about his reason for being on the panel. And I'm aware that that the current city attorney may have a different opinion about this, but that's what opinions are all about. I'm just sharing with you my time, my legal opinion, and so and I'm watching the chat line here, and so the fact that I'm not a trustworthy source to you, Rebecca, matters not to me. I'm trying to be straightforward in the information that I've dealt with for a lot of years, and accept it or don't accept it. It's up to you. The other myth that has been out there that I think needs to be discussed is the idea that somehow the city and the Fair Board have been in negotiations for years. That's not true.
Small pause
Yep.
for interpreters.
Okay.
And I also just want to take this opportunity briefly, sorry, Brian, to just ask panelists, not everybody can access the chat, and it can be a little bit distracting for some panelists for information to be there, and we want to make sure everybody can hear everything. So please just limit comments in the chat and just raise your hand for the Q&A. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to give that reminder for everybody. All right, I'll pause and then give you the go ahead, Brian.
Sure. So the where I left it was whether there had been ongoing negotiations between the city and the Fair Board over the years. And the fact is that in the time that I was a city council member, we didn't negotiate with the Fair Board. And the point of it was that we owned the property. I'm speaking from the perspective of the city. And we didn't spend much time talking with the Fair Board. And that remains true today. When I was a Fair Board member, we didn't have discussions with the city council, as an example. There were cooperations around studies and things like that, but there weren't ongoing negotiations. There haven't been, there aren't now. The difficulty for the fairgrounds, and Allison so masterly stated it, is that the lease is running out in 2023, as you know. And so the Fair Board for years has been backed into a corner around whether it could make investments in the property there and finance it.
Pause.
No bank, I'll take a pause. No bank or financial institution was willing, as an example, to provide capital improvement funds when the disposition or future of the fairgrounds was unknown. And that's been, quite honestly, a huge impediment. And so that difficulty, along with others, has been ever present in the discussion between the city and the Fair Board. Now, the Fair Board over the years has been very generous with the city, and was certainly during my time, in terms of trying to provide the city constituents with things that they might need. For example, if you go back in time, that fairgrounds area was about 100 acres. Then the library was given to the city, library property, the skateboard park, the swim center, the road easement into the Target shopping center. These were all examples of where the Fair Board and the city could cooperate and did cooperate for the greater good of the community. So it brings us to where we are today. And where we are today is that the Fair remains willing, the Fair Board remains willing, in my view, to be amenable to discussions of any kind. But frankly, with the lease expiring in 2023, it occurs to me that there isn't a lot of value in some respects for the city to, quite honestly, negotiate because time's running out. And this has been a concern for quite some time. And so the importance of this panel today is to help, I think, the city, and that's the city council, the Fair Board and others, to realize what the opportunities are and what the constraints are. So for example, thank you, Lynn. So for example, several years ago, I, as a Fair Board member, was involved in the negotiations to potentially bring, if you may recall this, some of the panel, to bring a minor league baseball team to the fairgrounds. And we negotiated that for quite some time until we hit a stumbling block, which was that the fair would have to turn over all of the concessions, all of the signage, all of everything to the minor league baseball owner for a long period of time. And eventually that was an untenable deal, something I couldn't sign on to. And years later, I heard criticism about that. But as a steward of the fairgrounds property, that would not have been the best use. But there are all kinds of uses that may be available, which preserve the fairgrounds and avoid what I have heard, whether I was a city council member or a Fair Board member, and that is to take 60 some acres in the middle of a community, unique in California, folks, in the middle of a community, and somehow turn that into into some development. That is what the residents empirically residents empirically are fearful of. I've been involved in at least 3 surveys of the community, and it's very clear. It's very clear the community is not interested in developing that property. And I would say, as a former city council member, from a traffic, okay, I'm being asked to pause here. Are we good to go? Okay. From a traffic and circulation standpoint, that property, which was once at the edge of town, is now in the middle of town. It's problematic to think about development there in the way that some people envision. And I'll leave it with this. The fairgrounds have been a godsend in crisis. The fires of 2017 proved that to all of us, that we need that kind of resource in the community. With that,
And
I'll
please
close.
just finish your
Any
sentence.
questions?
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Allison. Now we will open it up for questions and make sure to give a pause between each question asker and the answer. Great. I saw that several people had put questions in the chat too, and we will be monitoring those or bringing those into the space. So if you had a question in chat, please raise your hand. Okay, let's go first to Liz.
Good morning, everyone. My initial idea of the question was directed at Allison, but I'm not opposed if Brian feels suitable to answer as well. But Allison, you mentioned that if things broke at the fairgrounds, you would not have to contact the city for maintenance of it, and that the fair board would perform.
I can't hear you, Elizabeth.
Liz, can you pause if you can hear us, Liz? It looks like your audio is cutting out.
Or were these paid by tax
Liz,
revenue?
can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you, your audio cut out for most of that question. Would you mind repeating?
Sure. Okay. So my initially my question was posed for Allison, but if Brian feels appropriate to answer, I'm not opposed to either one. But Allison mentioned that one of the benefits of the fairgrounds holding the lease on the fair was that if something broke, they didn't have to call the city to pay for maintenance, that they themselves contracted out to whatever entity it was, and they paid for it. Were the funds that were used to pay from that fair revenue, or does that come from state funding? And on top of that, approximately how much?
Oh, Liz, we almost got through your question.
I can answer part of what I heard.
Sure.
Is that all right?
Approximately,
I think that's
how
fine.
often were they receiving citations or deficiencies for the fairgrounds?
Okay. So Liz, we got most of your question and Allison is prepared to respond. If you'd like to, the last few sentences, if you'd like to put those in the chat, and if we have time to circle back, we will.
Sure.
Let's go ahead and open it to an answer after a brief pause.
I think her question was, how are these paid for? How are repairs paid for? Okay. So the approximate $2 million budget that operates the fairgrounds, of all that money, roughly $42,000 of that income is provided by state funding. It's a structure part of the state budget that is goes across the board to all fairgrounds. It is far less than what was provided in 2008. The fairgrounds were much more highly subsidized at that point by the state, but so it's about $42,000. The rest of the revenue is generated by income.
Allison,
sure.
Brief pause. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. The rest of the revenue is generated by long-term rental contracts, interim rental events. Okay, because you can imagine $42,000 doesn't even pay one salary. Okay, so I believe you also asked about citations.
Yeah.
There have been no citations about from Public Health or CAL FIRE or the California Fair Services Authority to major issues, but the California Fair Services Authority, which manages the risk pool for most of the fair system, inspects the property every year and provides a list of items to be repaired, and the fair prioritizes budgets and works through that list every single year. But has anything been condemned? No.
Okay.
And there are a number of inspections that happen. I probably in my last year did 6 inspections with a variety of entities.
And if they came up with deficiencies,
Liz,
how quickly would they have to
Liz.
rectify it? Sorry.
Okay, yeah, as usual, if it's a very quick clarifying follow-up question, we'll allow that, but generally, let's move on to the next question. So a couple words response, Brian or Allison, to that last question.
Oh, how long? Well, just like you do at home, you've got long-term, short-term, mid-term things that you need to address. And then you have things that are safety and security issues that get addressed first. So there's no easy answer to that. Of course, it depends, but safety and security is priority. And depending on the length of time that project takes, or if we need to go to the outside to bring in a contractor, it just depends, but things are handled timely.
Okay, thank you. And we'll leave a pause here. All right, we'll go to the next question from Lena.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for moderation, and thank you for the speakers. I can imagine how challenging it is, and I'm just delighted to see the evolution since yesterday in handling the interpretation problem. My question today is, well, both you, Allison, and Brian talked about surveys that were sent out. Survey, as you mentioned, Allison, can be very skewed, or there could be tremendous amount of bias depending on how it's distributed, who it's distributed to, and what kinds of questions they are. My question is, were some of these surveys distributed to neighborhoods that have been highly impacted by the noise pollution coming out of the fairgrounds? Specifically the speedway racing and perhaps some of the louder events. And then also, and then when you say that, I'm sorry, just it's related question. When you say that it's been weighed and deliberate, your data has been evaluated for fairness, exactly what did you do?
We'll give a pause before the answer.
Of course. So the short answer to your question is that there is an opening page in the document that you received that explains how the survey was distributed and what the response rate was. And it goes through some of the caveats of the data collection, both qualitative and quantitative, and how the methodology was applied. Distribution was handled through 2 electronic distribution methods. So this was to the city's listserv and the fair's listserv. And the city reviewed the questions. I did make some changes to the questions based on Peggy Flynn's input. And then we used both the city's list and our list to distribute. It was not perfect in the sense that nobody went door to door in neighborhoods, but it was a way to get some information during COVID. The original plan for public input before COVID happened, when the city had hired a different consulting firm, was to come onto the fairgrounds and to go into neighborhoods and do face-to-face data collection. Unfortunately, we were not able to do that, and that was disappointing. So this was the best method we could use at the time, working with the city to get to as many people as we could.
Lena, thank you for that question. It's
Just give a pause before you speak,
yeah.
Brian.
All righty.
Okay.
Okay. Lena, that was an excellent question. Surveys, and I'm involved with them all the time in my own world. Depending on the questions that are asked, who they're asked to, when they're asked, what methodology you utilize to obtain responses is all important. So the surveys, when I read them, they have to be based more on the science, the demographics, and I'm convinced in looking at the surveys that I've seen over the years, that they capture if nothing else, a feeling that you get from the community about the nature of the fairgrounds.
Thank you. I certainly didn't see the survey myself, and I would have answered it. I would have gladly answered it had I seen it. I'll ask my neighbors if they received it.
Right, let's leave a pause before our next question. Right, let's go to Jackie.
Hello. So I want to preface this with I did ask Alex in the chat if one of the documents that we've requested is the actual language of the lease. And again, my question is mostly inspired by directing it at Allison, but happy to have either party answer it. When we speak about sort of the misconception of the stewardship of the grounds, I'm curious, I think Allison mentioned that there's 500 to 700,000 a year in repairs that's active. And to me, it seems like we keep talking about this lease in similar terms to a residential lease rather than a commercial lease in my experience. And so I wonder, of those funds, how much of the grounds, how much of that is on the grounds themselves and how much of that is on the 4GA improvements like the buildings. The HVAC on the preschool was a great example where it completely failed before it was replaced, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. So what is the question?
How much of that money that's spent on repairs is spent on maintaining the grounds that the 4GAA rents as opposed to the 4GAA improvements that they're responsible for?
Oh, that's a good question.
Quick pause first, Allison.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, without having current access to the budget in front of me, I'm not sure how I could very accurately answer that question, but you know, are there spaces, I guess, identified that need to be improved, and do they get added to the list? And I always had 4 to 5 projects that were, you know, getting ready for upgrades or improvements. But then what would happen is, you know, we'd have a fence fall down, and so suddenly then you're taking care of that first. And so it's the emergencies tend to push down some of the other improvements. When somebody hits the fire hydrant in the parking lot, you have to stop what you're doing and go fix that. So that is part of the challenge. But as far as a ratio, I can't tell you right now, but there are always lists of things that need to be improved. Yeah.
I don't have anything necessarily to add to that. I think Allison's right. The one thing I would comment on is I'm monitoring the chat line, and there's a reference to whatever the current city attorney said yesterday. And Jared says, because we're a charter city or a charter, they can do whatever they want. Just a little bit of history that's important. And the city attorney should know this. Petaluma became a charter city in the 1940s. This bond arrangement happened at the turn of the century, last century. You don't get to change things because you passed a charter and you're no longer a general law city. And I won't go into what all that means. So the fact that it's a charter city doesn't mean the city can do whatever it wants. It can regulate things like something that I found amusing in comparison to other cities, which is the original charter paid the city council $5 a meeting, not to exceed $10 a month. The mayor got the sum of $10 a meeting, not to exceed $20 a month. That's still in place today. Still in place today. When, if you were a general law city, and there's distinctions, and we don't have time for that today, a general law city can set a pay scale relative to other cities in California. So without getting off topic, there are just different laws that apply. But what you don't get to do is say, today I'm a charter city. So all agreements, all votes taken by the people go out the window. That isn't how it works. And that's what city attorneys made very clear to me, and state's attorneys made very clear to me. And I don't know what Eric Danley said yesterday, but I know what I've been briefed on over the years.
Okay, let's pause. Great. And I will again just ask our presenters to just respond to questions that have been voiced that everybody has heard. It can be, again, not everybody can see the chat, so it might be confusing if there are responses happening to comments that not everybody has heard. So anybody who has a question, please raise their hand so that we can all hear you.
And I just asked
we'll
for a document based on that answer.
Okay, we'll follow. And Jackie, we'll follow up with you in chat about any documents. Yeah, I just want to make sure to get to folks who have their hands raised. So I'm going to give a small pause, and then I'll cue you to ask your question, Deb. Okay, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My question is for both of you, and with your wealth of knowledge that you have from so much experience, I was wondering what you think of the idea of having the fence taken down and there being the ability to walk or bike through the fairgrounds area. I know some people are against this because they have safety concerns for the charter school. And then some of us are for it because we feel like that would be good for the mobility of non-car walkability and bikeability through the middle of our town. So I'm wondering what both of you, your opinions on the pros and cons is about that.
Allison, you want to take the first shot there?
I do. I'll wait a sec and then I'll go ahead and take that.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to use the word evolve again. I think this is a great example of how the fairgrounds can evolve. The answer to opening up the fairgrounds isn't quite as simple as just opening the gate and taking down the fence. However, with good planning and careful use of the space, we can come up with a solution that protects the minor children on the property and makes the grounds accessible, at least for part of the day, to people to walk, to bike, and to utilize the property more openly. And again, I mentioned flexibility and multi-use and planning it the right way with some creative solutions. We definitely could do that. I did open the fairgrounds on a series of Saturdays where no other events were happening, so people could come and walk and bike. Wasn't highly used, but it takes a while to get the word out on something like that. So again, I think all good ideas have a solution and are possible.
I would add that I agree with Allison. I think there are all kinds of opportunities at the fairgrounds property. And you have to, as a practical matter, things like liability have to be solved. If it remains, if it's a city run event or whatever, or a city directed event, there are the questions of people on the grounds and the need to keep them safe. But these are solvable things, and maybe some of the fencing could come down, and temporary fencing could be utilized at various times depending on the event. But I've always been of the opinion that the grounds had the ability to host soccer tournaments and all sorts of things that the whole city would be able to utilize, and the kids of our community would be able to utilize. Always thought that was possible, and I think a negotiated solution where all the parties sit down and work it out can produce some of these things.
Okay. Thanks, Lynn, for monitoring the Spanish channel. That's awesome. All right, and quick note, so we're going to go to Brandy, Jasmine, and then I think Greg had his physical hand raised before Brian came on. Forgot to mention that. And we will extend the Q&A by a few minutes here until about 10:23. So Brandy, go ahead and come off mute.
Okay, I kind of had a question for both of you with your experience. What was, in your opinion, a feasible addition that we could add to the fairgrounds that meets the standards of what the community wants or needs?
I'd be happy to start with that. So the Fair Board, over the past 15 years, maybe a little bit longer, actually came up with several conceptual designs of reuse of the grounds. Those designs were shared with the city planner of the day or city manager of the day. We still have copies in storage of those plans, and some of those plans and space usage concepts were shared on the city's website, that was cityofpetaluma.org/fairgrounds planning. I don't know if they're still there, but they were there for quite some time. So I think that there have been a lot of great ideas for shifting, changing, altering use and designing the space. We never got any feedback from the city on those ideas, but I think that would be a great start to pull those drawings out, lay them out on the table in a collaborative way, taking the list of what you've gathered from your open sessions and surveys and the continued work you're doing, and then take a look and say, okay, what's next? What do we do? I really think the sky's the limit. I really do.
I don't have anything to add. I think that's the perfect answer. I think the key is people sitting in a room talking. And it's, and like Allison says, laying out a set of plans and coming up with something that everybody can live with and protects the one thing that I have talked about for a really long time, and I referred to it earlier, and that is keeping the uniqueness of this property in the event of a catastrophe, much like the 2017 fires, available for not just Petaluma, but for the region. I can share with you that during the 2017 fires, when the Fairgrounds became a massive evacuation center, that I was hearing from state elected officials about what a relief it was to have this option. And so people talked about, well, how about the Sonoma County Fairgrounds? You may recall at one point, the Sonoma County Fairgrounds were in some danger. And so that's what makes this property unique. And I'll stop there.
Okay. We might just have time for a question, actually. Let's hand it to Jasmine.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So this question is directed at both of you in case one of you actually knows the answer to this question. In budget discussions for any year, have you ever discussed implementing any potential sound mitigation measures that result from the noise pollution coming from the events in the Speedway?
I would love to answer that. Give it a second. I had a wonderful discussion 2 weeks ago with a gentleman who lives on Petaluma Street, right next door. And I asked him, because I'd been there for 4 years, and the noise complaints about the Speedway, I didn't get any my first 18 months there. And they kicked up after COVID, which I thought was interesting, and became really a little more prevalent. But what was interesting is I asked him, I said, was the noise always bad? And he said, no. And I said, how long has it been bad? And he said, it started about 2 years ago. And I asked him, I said, well, during COVID, nothing was happening on the property. So
Pause, please.
I'm trying to understand. Thank you. And he sat there for a minute, and we were going back and forth about this. And he looked at me at one point and he said, when everything changed was when they widened the freeway and they took out all the trees. So that is the first time I've heard anybody reference that. And now that we know that, as far as sound mitigation, yes, I think we finally have a potential, we've identified why things are different and possibly can start looking at solutions. But I'll be honest, the sound, at least from my perspective, the number of complaints really increased in the most recent 2 years. And would the Fair Board be open to coming up with some sound mitigation? Absolutely. As we look at redesigning the property for multiple uses in order to better handle sound midtown, absolutely. Let's design it accordingly. Let's change the direction of some of these flat surfaces. I think that is very important. I also want to add that not every sound that is loud is coming from the fairgrounds. I have received calls complaining about sound on days where nothing was happening at the fairgrounds. But the people that drag race up and down Kenilworth Drive, it's amazing how that sound travels. So I think, again, back to city and Fair Board collaborating on how to best handle all of the sound mitigation in Midtown is the solution to this problem.
Thank you. Just clarifying question. So did you actually have discussions about budgeting for sound mitigation in your time there?
No, because it wasn't an issue.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So we had, I operated the property. We had COVID, and then when the Speedway started up again during COVID, that's when I really saw a lot of complaints.
Okay.
And so that was not within a budget cycle.
Thank you. And I'm sorry to interrupt. We are a few minutes over, so I think we need to close this Q&A. Thank you so much to our presenters, panelists. Please feel free to applaud in any way or thank our presenters in any way you'd like. Really grateful for your time on a Saturday morning. And Allison, Brian, feel free to make your way out of the Zoom room. Panelists, we will be on break until 10:52. Please be in your seats, videos on, and ready to go at 10:52. Oh, Lynn, did you have something?
10:42, I think, right?
42, yep.
42, 15 minutes.
I'll drink more coffee so I can do math after we come back. Thank you. 10:42. See you back here.
Thank you, everyone.
And Grace, could you stop the live?